Hey everyone, it's Sleepy Reader, aka Damien. This is one of my comic book thoughts videos. It's a crazy one because I've been postponing doing one of these videos for a while, and I've got 29 or 30 comic books that I'm going to try to cover quickly. Excuse me. I have been watching a lot of YouTube videos lately and maybe having trouble. I just watched a great live chat with Rasa and Terrence, and then I'm in the middle of watching For the Love of Comics and Earl Grey have this fantastic conversation that I think goes on for nearly 2 hours. I guess about an hour and 50 minutes, around 40 minutes. So yeah, I finally pulled myself. I have to finish listening to that, but loving it. And lots of other great YouTube videos too that I watched just today, like Oddfellow Thoughts, one of his comic book reviews, and 9-Panel Grid, also doing comic book reviews. And I don't know if it was today or last night that I watched an excellent video from Nick at Comic Culture, also reviewing current comics. So I should be in a current comic reviewing mood. It's kind of artificial, but I've split these 29 comics into different piles of different kinds. Man, I should start over, but I'm not gonna. I've split them up into little piles of different types of comics, like genres, perhaps. Although there were questions in my mind where things should fit. It's an artificial way to give myself a little structure to work on, just like the comic book countdown that I used to do, and maybe we'll get back to, was an artificial structure also. I might be a bit cantankerous, but at the same time, about some of these comics. But at the same time, during this 2-week period that I've been reading, I've just been thinking, wow, I think indie comic books are back. Like about a year and a half ago, I thought maybe indie comics were going through a bit of a slump. There weren't as many really great ones, but I feel like there's a ton of great ones right now, and I'm not even reading them all because I hear about them on other people's shows. And so I think the indie comics are making a comeback. DC and Marvel, I'm not sure because I'm not reading enough of them anymore. The other strand of my thinking was there's some really fantastic comic artists out there right now. Maybe mostly in indie comics, I'm not sure, because one of my favorites here was actually in a DC comic. But a lot of people are really killing it with their comic art. And I lean more and more onto the side that the comic book artist is a little more important than the writer. You need a decent story for a good artist to hang his artwork on that will then really give you a great comic. But for a while you can read a comic that makes no sense with great art. But it feels like the artists are carrying much more of the load to me. And when the art is good, that really shows. So anyway, those are my kind of overall thoughts. And I will start with the category that I only have 2 comics in that I'm calling post-underground comics, if you will. More, what we now talk about Image and Dark Horse as indie comics. So these are more indie than that, more alternative, more out there. And one of the kings of alternative out there comics since the 1980s is Gilbert Hernandez of the Hernandez brothers of Love and Rocket fame. And for some reason, I picked up the next issue of Psychodrama Illustrated. The story here is continued from issue 7. It is apparently, a comic book that is the movie that the busty character Fritz stars in. And I was just curious. I didn't think much of the previous issue, and I was curious how Hernandez would wrap it up, or I think it's wrapped up now, what he would do next. I guess that's one way to sell comics. What's going to happen next? But my ultimate decision was, this is crap. This is Hernandez. I don't know. He's just making crap up. It's dirty. It's I don't know. To me, I hate to use the word offensive, but how to put it? We have this woman who's kind of like the king's whore, I guess, and she kills someone with the knife of this young fellow who ends up getting hanged. And she could admit that she borrowed the knife from him, but she doesn't. She does, before he dies, let him masturbate on her breasts. And then she gets raped by the boy's father, the boy who got hanged. Then I think she smothers the king to death while having sex with him, and is told to never return. And then she is raped over and over again by ghosts, or a ghost. The ghost, perhaps, of the boy, or is it of the king? But it's pretty awful. And I don't feel like there's anything more there than what I just told you. There's no. So it's just Hernandez getting off on all these rapes, as far as I can tell. And I don't know. Larger context? A spoof on some kind of movie? I don't think so, really. On a brighter side, I got Pee Pee Poo Poo issue number 1. This is, I think, the 4th issue. She's had like issue number 700 and things like that. I can't remember. It probably doesn't show the previous issues here. So she just won the Eisner Award for Best Limited Series. I don't know if Pee Pee Poo Poo really is a limited series. It's a series of short autobiographical stories, most of which are kind of humorous. She's a lesbian living kind of the bohemian life, drinking, smoking pot, creating comics. And it's a real breeze to read her work. When reading this, I was thinking, comparing this to a different kind of comic. This kind of comic is like listening to a stand-up comedian, whereas maybe a lot of the other comics I read are like watching a fictional TV show, an ongoing TV show, or watching a movie, or reading a novel. But this is like stand-up comedian kind of stuff in a way. Maybe, it's a lot of short little vignettes, and even if each one is kind of minor, they build up to something enjoyable. The other thought I had while reading this, and I wonder if it was true about kind of autobiographical comics I read in the past, but I didn't think about it so much. But in recent years, I've thought a lot about the act of humble bragging. And I feel like a lot of this stuff in here is kind of a lot of humble brags. It's like, oh, I have this neurosis, or I have these issues, or I was in this embarrassing situation. But the overall picture is kind of, I have a cool life. I'm kind of cool. Look at me. And it is all, that may be unavoidable, I guess, it's certainly a lot of autobiographical work of any kind might have that aspect. I love what she does with her covers. All the other covers were references to famous comic book covers, like a Zap Comics or a Daniel Clowes. This one might be a reference to something, but I'm not sure. Is this a reference to maybe a Charles Burns cover or album cover or something? I'm not sure. But the art inside is pretty much just her own style. So yeah, I don't love it. I enjoy it. I could probably take it or leave it. I read a couple issues on Hoopla, so it's on Hoopla, believe it or not, even though it's so indie. And I gave away my last physical copy to a good friend. I might give this away, or I might start. I really like the covers. Anyway, it's fun stuff. And, yeah, I just always have issues with autobiography. Let's see. So next is my quite large stack of what I'm classifying as science fiction. Some other ones might classify as science fiction too, and maybe one in here doesn't. I'm not sure. But sort of at the bottom of the pile, I loved all of I enjoyed all of these. I really liked Napalm Lullaby to largely the art and partially for the story, but the story isn't being unveiled very well compared to how it could be, I suppose. But the art is fantastic, and I am interested in this story about a religion that forms out of some kind of alien superhuman who is manipulated by his human parents and perhaps other human followers, and has had some children. So we pretty much learned in the last issue that our heroes, if they are our heroes, are children of this alien Superman type character. And we have a big fight versus the Supergirl character, who must be one of his children also? Or is she like Supergirl, a cousin of his? And she is the enforcer for the church. And so we have a big battle. But I became confused whose powers were what, and was she battling just one person? It seemed like there were two sets of powers she had to battle. So there's the other set of powers. But who the powers came from, which character it came from? Because it seemed like there was only one character with powers who was conscious. I don't know. So good in a way, but a little bit too confusing. And then in the sci-fi section, the next one near the bottom of the pile is Precious Metal, which I hate to do because the art is so good. But it's so far, maybe if I reread it all together, I will make sense of it, but it makes me feel dumb. Like I can't parse it all out. I have trouble. I think there's switching back and forth between different times. I have trouble figuring that out. I don't know if this character is the same as this character. I don't know the significance of all these characters. And the art makes me want to try to understand it. If this had mediocre art but read like it does, I would be gone immediately. So when all the issues come out, I will reread the whole thing together and see if it makes a difference for me. One thing that struck me, I read Little Bird, I guess 4 years ago or whenever it came out, and this one feels like a wilder, further in the future. It's a prequel to Little Bird, but with my memory of Little Bird and this compared to this one seems much wilder. Maybe because the artist has advanced in his ability to give us these wild scenes. And I kind of joke around with people about, is this finally the artist who's out Mobiusing Mobius? And I'm probably wrong on that. Because Mobius is also a master of minimalism at times, and this is definitely a maximalist comic. And it has fantastic maximalist coloring, too. The colorist should not be left out. The artist is Ian Bertram. The colorist is Matt Hollingsworth. But parsing it all, and maybe part of the problem parsing things is in the art. I don't know, but I think mostly it's that the writer thinks we can figure out, or not we, because I know some people who think it's the very best comic coming out right now. The writer thinks I can figure it out more than I can. I guess proof I'm too old. He probably doesn't want to write for old geezers like me anyway. So there's that. Then I enjoyed Geiger. This issue it's a kind of a dark, it's a weird thing. Geyser is a dark but fun comic. And it's even darker in this issue, where a lot more of the weakness of Geiger is involved, and the apparent death of his three-headed dog. Our character with the most growth is this Atomic Knight, who was a total bad guy in a previous volume and is slowly becoming more and more kind of one of our heroes. Anyway, beautiful art, a nice step in the story. I'll be interested to see where this is going, because it did, like I said, it did take a darker turn here. I don't know if it will just go back to its episodic kind of fun stories or if we're heading somewhere new. An interesting comic, which I probably won't continue with, was Convert. This is written by John Arcudi, who I used to know mostly from the writing stories in the Mignola verse over at Dark Horse, the BPRD, and a lot of other stuff like that. And he did a series that was really great when it had a really great artist on it. When it, what was it called? Now I can't remember. A great series at Image, though, that depended a lot on the art. Anyway, I didn't fall in love with this art, and it's a story of a stranded astronaut on a alien planet that almost can support human life, but not really. So he's struggling to survive. And at the end, spoilers, we meet the sentient aliens. At first it seems like there's no sentient aliens. I'm spoiling it and showing it because the interesting thing is their heads are skulls. And I've seen that in a number of other places where you have sort of monsters or aliens whose heads are just skulls, and it doesn't really make sense to me, but it seems to be a trend in comic book art. But the reason why I don't think I'll continue with it is because this first issue didn't suck me in terms of character. He had no one to interact with, and the idea of just an astronaut surviving in a tough environment just wasn't enough to make me super excited, and I have so many comics I'm getting. But it was good, but just not to suck me in enough. Flash Gordon, I'm a sucker for the old pulp stuff, and Flash Gordon is a prime old pulp character. This story is now making me think that the whole arc is going to take place on this prison planet before Flash gets, so there'll have to be another arc where Flash gets out of the prison planet and begins the real adventure, so to speak. So this is kind of cool. I enjoyed it. I'm not complaining, but I was surprised because I thought we'll get off the prison planet and then we'll find out about the new situation in the worlds beyond, where Dale Arden is somewhere out there and the people from Mongo are scattered in various places. So anyway, a lot of fun, cool, cheap pulp for when you want it. Another kind of pulp, Red Coat. So I'm putting this in the science fiction pile just because it's alternate history, I guess. Although it also could be kind of fantasy or something along those lines. But another really fun issue. 9-Panel Grid in his review pointed out that this issue things get a little darker, which is interesting because I noticed that in Geiger. So once he said that, Eric from 9-Panel Grid, I was like, yeah, you're right. This has a darker, the tone is probably so slowly shifting into a darker area, but there's still plenty of zaniness and crazy warping of history American history that I'm really enjoying. And so continue to really enjoy that a lot. A big fun thing for me, Standstill. I'm definitely adding this to my pull list. It is a monster. I think it's about 60 pages long for $5. So there's a lot of $5 books that are just 20 pages long. So that was excellent. And it's a science fiction trope, I guess, or a comic book trope too. This guy has the power to stop time, and then he's still moving, so he can do anything he wants. And it sort of like plays with the idea of what would you do if you had that power, and he seems to be trying to do good deeds, maybe for money. Maybe people are hiring him to do that. Maybe he's also a jerk, though. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops. But it's very smoothly told, very nicely paced. They, instead of packing an enormous amount of story in these large number of pages, 50 or 60, I think, what they do is they do a lot of large panels to allow the art to really breathe. Now, if I had paid a lot of money if this was a $10 comic, then I would be upset there wasn't more story maybe. But at $5 and just having the art kind of spread out across these pages is actually really cool. It feels a little different from your average indie comic. So just because of the way the art's done. So I'm enjoying it a lot. I'm definitely adding it to my pull list. There are, some questions as to where it's going. The other thing to say about it is written and colored by Lee Lowridge, who is one of my favorite colorists. And I don't know if it's his first writing, but if it is, he's spot on in terms of pacing and creating characters through dialogue and everything like that. So that is excellent. And the interesting thing, well, a little note for me is this is not my favorite Lee Lowridge coloring. It's a fine coloring job, but sometimes I really fall in love with Lee Lowridge's coloring, and it didn't have that feeling here. So that's ironic that in his own book, maybe what he does in his commercial work, so to speak, to please other people, it pleases me more than what pleases himself. Or maybe this is just the tones he thought went best with this story anyway, and that's perhaps completely true. I am not at all denigrating the coloring in here. I liked it, but it's just not at the level that I sometimes really, that his coloring really sings to me. Here we have Gerard Way, Sean Simon writing, Chris Weston art, Dave Stewart color art, and Nate Picos on the lettering. And I'm loving this comic, Paranoid Gardens. Now the weird thing is, so that was at the top, this is kind of at the top of my science fiction pile. I don't even know if this really counts as science fiction, but I didn't know where to put it. But it is weird, and I don't understand everything, but I do understand panel to panel what's happening, and sort of the characters come through, and so I don't have that. I'm willing to take a lot of just weirdness and plotting, or just like the not knowing some of the basics, but if it's done right, if the story flows and captures me. Again, a great artist of a different sort than some of the modern artists. Chris Weston, I think he did am I right? He did a lot of work maybe in the 90s and the early 2000s, and then kind of disappeared from comics. But he's a very solid artist, and Dave Stewart, who 9 times out of 10 is a great colorist, and every once in a while goes wrong for me. He's doing everything right here. It's doing lots of great stuff, but keeping it kind of basic too, because that goes well with Chris Weston artwork. So, you can see, I didn't even notice till flipping through here, there's a lot of pages with a lot of panels, and because it serves the story. It has it's kind of a paced story that kind of moves at a steady pace. It doesn't have big jumps and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, it's issue number 2. I don't know how many issues there's going to be, but I'm really loving this. It's definitely one of my favorites of this 2-week period. Okay, my next pile is smaller than it has been in other weeks, is mystery, crime types of stories. And some of these intersect with other things. For instance, kind of at the bottom of my pile here is the last issue of Under Heist by the Laphams and Hilary Jenkins, the colorist. And I've half enjoyed and half not enjoyed this series. It's a little less murky what was going on by the end here, but the twist, I don't know. I didn't feel like it was earned by the story. But this is definitely one I'm going to reread because I think there's nuances I missed. And they're trying to do something very subtle here, but I'm not sure if it works, where there's this intersection of the land of the dead and the land of the living, and it involves criminals, what do you call them? Loan sharks and bank heists and that sort of stuff. the loan shark, I guess, can put people into this sort of nether zone after they're dead where they still have to repay their loans. So that's kind of clever. But the choices the character makes at the end was, I guess, shocking, but it didn't build up enough for me, or at least I didn't pick up enough. So it may be on a reread. Then there was this new comic called Huge, which it was a fine read, but it just didn't click with me. I think partially I was not a huge fan of the art. So the art did not convey to me the art did not seduce me in any way into the world of this mystery. It's kind of a science fiction story too, or a fantasy story too, because you literally have a world where these sort of super gigantic humanoids suddenly come up out of the earth and take over Australia. And then there's kind of a peace between humans and them. And then there's this mystery that they need the help of a huge detective from one of the Huges from Australia comes to, I assume, America to help solve a mystery. Why this mystery is important to solve and what it's all about just didn't grab me much. So yeah, I can imagine, like, if I hear that it gets really great, that I'll read it on Hoopla or get it in trade sometime. This Peter Milligan, Raul Fernandez work, Profane, is a minor but fun mystery story, again with kind of a fantasy element because it's got the character comes out of a mystery series to try to stop the criminal who comes out of the mystery series from killing a bunch of people, and the art's kind of basic, and the story doesn't have a whole lot of surprises. I feel like we've seen these kind of metafictional detective stories before, but it's a fun read. And Peter Milligan is a writer that I've stuck with through a lot of different stories, and I just want to see how this one's going to play out. Then my favorite of these mystery stories was Sanction by, does it say on the cover? Ray Fawkes, with art by Antonio Fuso. The story is very good, but the art sells it fantastically. Really good colors, too. The colors is Emilio Lecce. So this is the penultimate issue, and a lot has been revealed, but all very done in a very good way, and the characters are very believable. I did not live in the Soviet Union in the 80s, but I feel pretty convinced by it. And it's not very pro-Soviet, don't worry about that. Or Soviet government. Yeah, so I can't wait for the final revelations. I almost didn't pick this up because I didn't have a past history with Ray Fawkes that stood out to me. I mean, I read a few of his books back in the New 52, and he was not a standout author at the time. But now he feels like a standout mystery writer to me. I'm really impressed. Okay. Hand in hand with mystery stories come horror, right? So let's do horror next. Got a bunch of horror. I read the first 2 issues of Epitaphs from the Abyss, and the first issue felt really flat to me. Somehow I enjoyed the second issue a little better. Maybe I lowered my expectations too. But neither issue was good enough for me to want to add this to my pull list. I am always lured by the idea of anthology comics, and this does have art that's better than some of them. It doesn't really evoke EC horror to me at all. So I'm not sure why I liked issue 2 a little better. Maybe because issue 1 seemed to lean heavier into, not exactly politics, but kind of politics. Leaned heavier into the kind of stories that feel like they're drawn on present political, or sometimes drawn on present political issues, conflicts. Patera is the return, it seems, as far as I know, to comics by writer James Robinson. And it's not like anything else I've read by him. and it's meant to be kind of a homage to serial killer movies. And as such, it has really cool art. There's nothing wrong with it, but I don't really need an homage to serial killer movies. I've enjoyed Halloween and a few others, but I don't need a lot of serial killer stories in my life. So I don't think I'll continue to follow it. And it's already kind of fading from my memory what's going on. I think part of the story, now that I'm looking at the pictures again, is that there's this boy out in the wilderness alone with a serial killer, the one survivor from a family. But something's gone, something is controlling him. So it might end up being like the boy is going to become a serial killer too. I don't know. Had a lot of fun with this first issue of the Image Skybound Monsters, Universal Monsters, Frankenstein. Almost entirely done. There is a colorist, but other than that, almost entirely done by Michael Walsh. And the colors go perfectly with his art. It's very visually pleasing. I think, it's a pretty good, creepy take on Frankenstein, but what really hooks me is Michael's art. And it's a case of when the artist and the writer is the same person, things really click. So I'm definitely putting this in my pull list, or maybe I already have. And it's kind of moving. It can only go in a bad direction, right? It's about a boy who realizes some of the body parts of Frankenstein are his dad. And then finally, I liked quite a lot White Boat issue 2. I gave a quick skim over of White Boat issue 1 because that came out 4 or 5 months ago, and I liked it. And a huge selling point is the art of Francavilla. Yes, Francisco, not Frank. And he does the art and the color. And he's an artist who has a deceptively simple style, but I don't know, there's something super appealing about the way he puts his storytelling together, the way he does his comics, and his own use of color on his, again, very simple, but deceptively simple. So for some reason that I can't quite put my finger on it, Francisco's one of my favorite modern artists. This story started out, I was sure it was just a Cthulhu-esque horror story in this issue. Now in this issue, it starts to seem more like a almost an homage or a take on the whole Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells. So that's interesting. I wonder if it will twist again in the third and final, I think it says to be concluded, the third and final issue. Yeah, to be concluded. It's not perfect, and that's because of Scott Snyder's writing, but Francisco Francavilla makes up for it. Scott Snyder just wants to fill in a lot of the blanks of his awkwardly created or awkwardly presented science fiction idea in info dumping, particularly in things like that, and in lots of caption boxes with kind of small caption. Well, it's not too small, but so Snyder, I think, has studied horror very closely, and he's very good at that. He has science fiction ideas that aren't bad, but I don't think he studied how science fiction writers make their ideas come alive. But we got Francavilla, and I'm curious to where it's all going. I thought I could do this video real quickly, which was totally delusional on my part, but I am getting closer to the end. So then I have a stack of what I'm categorizing as superhero stories. Out of curiosity, because I was listening to an interview by Comics with Bueller, Travis, my friend. He interviewed the creator of Darkwing Duck, and that made me very interested in it, and I never really watched Darkwing Duck. I've watched DuckTales, but I missed Darkwing Duck when it came out. And so I thought, this all sounds really fun, and I like the idea of a group of superheroes. So this Justice Duck issue seemed like a fun thing. And it also is written by Langridge. What's his first name? Roger Langridge, who has written some really cool comics in the past. He's good at comedy, all ages stuff, but whatever age, he's a good writer. And I enjoyed this, but it was like a TV show, and it was kind of light fluff, but it definitely enjoyed the comic book within a comic book kind of aspect to it. I think this would be a great comic book for kids, and it's probably great for people who are very nostalgic for the Darkwing Duck universe. So yeah, that was cool. And then mixed feelings on Jenny Sparks. It's a Tom King book. It's got a superhero who's been turned into someone very bad, and Jenny Sparks is the person you call in when you need someone to take care of a superhero who's gone bad. Because Batman and Superman, they're not cool enough to handle that. So I don't enjoy the Tom King takedown of superheroes in general. And I have a warm spot for Captain Atom. But he's now a serial killer or a mass killer. Jenny Sparks, her main attribute seems to be this kind of attitude she has, which, she's 104 years old. She constantly smokes cigarettes. She constantly says the F word, although it's all garbled out. And she sleeps with men whose names she can't remember, and she remembers having threesomes with Clark Gable and stuff like that. So that's her personality. And I'm not impressed. I think that's supposed to make me think she's cool, but it's like a slutty 17-year-old girl cool, or something, slutty 21-year-old girl, let's hope. Cool. So there's probably more to it. Tom King is a very talented writer. The other thing about this comic is it constantly flashes to scenes with other people. And that's probably all going to add up to something overall, but as a first issue, it was a bit tiresome to read. So I might be tempted to pick this up again. It is a $5 comic. But I might, if I'm smart, I'll just wait. I've got the DC Universe Infinite. It only takes a month for the new comics to appear on it. So to satisfy my curiosity, I might just read that on the digital version there. I can't wait for Batman Dark Age. This is book 5. I assume book 6 will be the final book. I'm still enjoying this a lot. This is kind of my top superhero book these days. But this issue, even more than the others, it felt like there was too many moving parts. And I think this, instead of a double-sized issue every month for $6, which is a good deal, I think it might actually be a better read if it were shortened to 22-page comics that came out every month for 12 months. I think that might have organized the information and stuff as we go along. Things are looking pretty bad. And it ties into the whole stuff with the Superman series, Superman Golden Age, I think it was called. Superman something age. No, Superman Space Age that this team did previously. And that maybe works against this issue a little bit too, because it kind of undercuts what's going on with in Gotham when we're told in 10 years the world will end by the other Justice Leaguers, or is it 10 months or something? Anyhow, it's still a really cool thing, and definitely another one that I want to reread. I'll probably reread Superman Space Age, reread this. I'm guessing next comes Wonder Woman Golden Age, but we'll see. And that was written by Mark Russell, another Mark Russell book. He has a co-writer on this, My Bad, a wonderful, hilarious spoof series on comic book superheroes, more on Silver and Bronze Age superheroes, I would say. And this is the third miniseries. It's called Escape from Peculiar Island. You could start with Escape from Peculiar Island, but I would really go back to the first volume of My Bad as the best way to enjoy this, because the humor about the characters builds over time better and better. He co-writes it with Bryce Ingman. In fact, I think Bryce Ingman might be doing more of the writing in this issue, but I don't notice as we switch back and forth that there's a change. Like it's all funny and it's all kind of got this certain kind of goofy irony to it that it's a little hard to describe exactly. But yeah, so this is picking up. I feel like the coloring's getting better. I had a little complaints about the coloring earlier, and the peculiar island and what's going on there have become more in focus and is quite cool. So anyway, I really love My Bad. And that would be kind of my number one superhero book, but I'm madly in love with the art in Zatanna Bring Down the House. And it's a good sort of Elseworld story about Zatanna, or either that or a reboot of her origin. This is book 3. I don't know if there's going to be 4 books or 5 or 6. I hope 6. So the artist that I'm loving so much is Javier Rodriguez. He's also the colorist. In I think he's Brazilian. I think in U.S. comics he got his start as a colorist. I remember him coloring Chris Samney at one point and on Daredevil, and then doing a fill-in issue. And his art was pretty good, but his art keeps getting better, and it's really good at this point. There's just a lot of stuff I love about it. He's a great visual storyteller. He's very inventive. His colors have gotten really, really good. And this story allows him to be very creative, as did when he illustrated the Defenders Beyond stories a year or two ago over at Marvel. So he's now an artist I'm going to follow wherever he goes. Now this comic costs $6, and I'm not sure why. I mean, it does have a nicer cover. I haven't counted the pages. I'm guessing there might actually be 30 pages here or something. But, and I'm reading, so this and the Batman book that I just showed I'm reading are the only DC books I'm reading at the moment, but this makes me really curious what else DC's doing. So yeah, and it's a perfect example of a story that with a different artist would be okay, but with this artist, it's great. At least for me. So I have one more category. I saved sword and sorcery, or stuff that's kind of sword and sorcery-ish. I think most of it is definitely sword and sorcery, and then there's one questionable one, 2 maybe. So I've got a bunch of these sword and sorcery kind of comics. I picked up Barbaric and Death versus Deathstalker. It was a tedious read. The only interesting thing in here is the dialogue from the Crazy Magic Axe. And even that was overplayed. Like they knew they didn't have much else going on in this story. So to try to distract you from the lack of the plot making any sense, or having anything different about it from any generic sword and sorcery story, they just have the axe talk a lot. The art's pretty good. Coloring is kind of good in a gauche, what's the right term? A gaudy way. But it was hard to get through, to tell you the truth. And here's one, Babs, a new kind of Red Sonja and general sword and sorcery spoof from Garth Ennis and artist Jason Burrows. And it's okay, but the humor didn't land with me very well. And I wonder if that's partially the art. I don't know if Jason Burrows is a good artist for a humor comic. Or maybe it's just me. Maybe I am not on Garth Ennis's humor wavelength, at least for this kind of story. There seem to be some jabs. The bad guys were kind of have similar complaints to fanboys who don't like it when female characters take over for male characters, but that was, to me, very on the head, and I don't know. So it didn't do a lot for me. It won't go on my playlist. My pull list. Sadly, because I would like to have a fun, humorous Red Sonja-esque spoof from Garth Ennis, but just didn't work. And then we've got Conan the Barbarian number 14. This is, I think, a story that's a break from the whole Black Stone stuff, and it's basically narrated by the Frost Giant's daughter, as she's known from the original story, the Frost Giant's daughter. So she's kind of a goddess or a demigoddess or a daughter of a god, and she is basically stalking Conan and watching what he's up to. And the story's pretty good, but there's something about having it from her point of view that I don't know. It just doesn't feel right to me as much as or it doesn't. I'm not saying it's a bad comic at all or that I didn't enjoy it, but I think I would have enjoyed it better if it weren't told from her point of view, and I'm not sure what that's about. It's pretty bloody, a lot of fighting. The art by I never hated the art by, where's the credits for the artist? By the sort of second artist on Conan, the Doug Braithwaite, but I feel like his art has stepped up, and I continue to enjoy that a lot. I just don't know why. I really love the story, The Frost Giant's Daughter, and it just seems weird to bring her in earlier, like she knew who Conan was all along and was following him. I assume he can't meet her in this story, or at least I hope he can't, or because he first meets her in the Frost Giant's Daughter, which takes place after this story. Okay, and then we've got Savage Sword of Conan. Conan wearing pants? It just looks strange. Maybe if they did something to the pants to make them look more medieval or something. Like actually here on the back cover, here he is as King Conan, and that's kind of a more medieval looking set of pants there. But anyway, this is of all the great covers they've had on Savage Sword, that's my least favorite. But the art inside certainly makes up for it. There's a great frontispiece, and there's lots of fun pin-ups in here, and lots of great art and pretty fun stories. But I want to give you a warning. This is a giant 0 issue for Battle for the Black Stone. So if you have been reading all those earlier Titan Conans that are all about the Black Stone, this will be a lot of fun. If you're just a fan of all of Robert E. Howard obscurities, this might also be fun because all these different Robert E. Howard characters each get their own little small story. There's one set of characters, Conrad and Kirwan, who I've never heard of before. So my Robert E. Howard knowledge only goes so deep. And we get a Conan story. We get a Solomon Kane story. We get a Brissa story. Brissa is actually a new character made up by Jim Zub. We get a Dark Agnes story, and we get an El Borak story. And I'm surprised there was no Bran MacMorn story in here. But all of them are little teasers for the fact that I guess they will all be appearing together in this sort of crossover event that's about to happen, which ties in with all the Blackstone adventures Conan's already had. So if you've been following all that, this is a fantastic issue. If you haven't, if you just want to pick up Savage Sword of Conan, I think you should maybe skip this issue. I mean, you can enjoy the art. It is interesting. I loved this art by, so there was this almost kind of dreamlike story about Conan devolving. Maybe the Black Stone actually did this to him at some point, devolving into kind of a Neolithic or pre-human kind of human. That's pre-human kind of sapien. But with art by Fernando Dagino. And I really like his art. I would love it if he did an arc in the color thing. but at times they seem to have not understood how to do the grayscale on in a black and white comic in this one. So it gets at times a little less than ideal. And let me see. Oh, I guess this will take too much time. But as I've been doing with a lot of Conan, I got it on digitally on the Hoopla app. So here you can see that same. Sometimes digitally you'll see, oh, it worked digitally and they just didn't realize it wouldn't print. But here's that same image. It's too dark even on the digital thing in some areas, so that the art is lost in blackness, and I don't think to any useful effect. So I don't know. That's just an interesting thing to me. My favorite story and probably my favorite art, although I like the D'Aguino art a lot, was the Solomon Kane story, which is written and illustrated, and I presume grayscaled by Patrick Zurcher. And he does a great job with all of those tasks. So he shows the other artists how you can use the grays without losing anything, and sort of complementing and making the action and the scenes stand out. So Patrick Zurcher wins a little award from me there. I really hope Titan hangs on to him and gives him a lot more sort of Robert E. Howard-based assignments, because he really gets it, I think, on both the art and the story level. He had the coolest monster, too. So that was really great. What else have we got? The Brissa story was fine. It's a sign of how they have this long plan. And I think they're trying to, retain their copyright on a kind of Robert E. Howard universe, where some of the individual stories are probably going out of copyright pretty soon. And maybe that to sell in Hollywood or to use in games, because I believe the company Heroic Signatures is a spin-off from a gaming company, maybe even a board game company, I'm not sure. So they may be looking to having games that are Robert E. Howard thing. The art in this Conrad and Kirawan story was less exciting for me, and then I had real mixed feelings. So this story about a female hero of his named Dark Agnes, in ways the art's really great, except it uses those kind of manga anime faces for our heroine. I don't think for all the other characters, but maybe for all the female characters. And to me, it makes her look like she's 12 years old. It's the face of a 12-year-old or an 11-year-old, a pre-adolescent, or at best an adolescent without zits. So I don't know. That just, every time I was reading it, it just sort of distracted me and knocked me out of the story. Now, most people, I suppose, have grown up with manga and probably say, wow, that's great to have that kind of face, but not to me. So anyway, otherwise I was quite impressed by the art, but that face tripped me up. And there was a cool El Borak story. I'd like to read some of the original El Borak stories. I might have when I was young. I mostly know that they adapted a lot of his stories into Conan stories, I believe. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the Blackstone thing. Although then I hope they focus both their books on standalone Conan adventures. Maybe occasionally have some other Robert E. Howard character pop up here or there, but I don't really need the whole group to be together all the time. And I'd love it if they did some Bran Mak Morn. But my two favorites this time around in a fantasy sword and sorcery kind of setting were these two, was William of Newbury, which this is the final issue, at least of the first story, although it seems to promise more stories to come. And it gives him kind of a happy ending, which is nice. I just love the art in here. And the story is fun, and the characters feel real, even though they feel totally real, even though they are anthropomorphic animals, and the magic parts are fun. There isn't really any swords, so it's a little bit cheap to put in sword and sorcery. But where else would I put it? But it has a lot to do with sort of Christianity and the pagan religions that still reside in the land while Christianity is starting to take over. So anyway, it's seduced me with the art and color, and had a great set of characters and a fun story. And then my top, as is so often the case, was Usagi Yojimbo. This is the finale of this 5-part, which is pretty long for a Usagi story, 5-part story called The Crow. And it had a nice twist after the ending, which I thought was very meaningful. And it just sort of, it was a violent, action-filled story, but that still asks some questions about things. Yeah, and that you don't see that much violence too often in Usagi Yojimbo, with the literal chopping off of a head. But enjoyed it a lot. So, lots of great books. I'm trying to think if there's any that I completely regretted getting. Maybe The Barbaric and Deathstalker. Maybe not. So, it's Sword and Sorcery. I just kind of had to get it anyway. So, I'll talk to you all soon, and I hope you're having a good time reading your comics.